Wow. You know, I did not recall ever wanting to be an actress when I first started studying and I found acting until just before my mother passed away. She presented my husband with a little piece of paper that I had typewritten. It's the story of what I want to be when I was 10 years old. And that Christmas, my husband gave me this piece of paper along with some childhood photos. And lo and behold, in the middle of that, little story, I stated that I wanted to be a movie star. I had no recollection of ever wanting to pursue acting. As a matter of fact, when it was first suggested to me when I was in my 20s and on the poetry scene in New York, I was completely appalled by the idea. There had been some suggestions, just folks, in passing would say, oh, you should do print modeling, you should be an actress. And I thought it was the most vain profession that anyone could get into, and it was very ego-driven, and I was, quite opposed to anything of that nature, in terms of career anyway. So I had always thought that the story was I never wanted to be an actress, and this profession just kept knocking me in the back of the head, and eventually I felt I had to turn around and face it. My first acting job was a small independent film titled Work. Rachel Reichman was the director. Very few people have seen that film because at the time I didn't consider myself an actress. I was a spoken word artist. I had gone back to school. I was pursuing a degree in English and had planned on teaching English in a inner city high school and writing a novel. That was the track that I was on. But there was a fellow by the name of Greg Tate. He was a film and music critic for the Village Voice at the time, and he was a friend of mine who had seen me on stage quite a bit, and he thought that I should audition for this role. And the way he got me to do it was he simply told me that the role called for someone with an athletic build. The character was a track star in high school, and I played sports in high school, and he just thought, yeah, you should just go out for it. He was someone I respected, so I thought, what harm does it do? And I ended up with the role, and so I thought I'd just try it. I have a sort of adventurous nature, and I thought, I'll try anything once. It was a 6-week shoot. How many times in your life is someone going to ask you to be in a film? And so I thought, hey, let's just do it for fun. That was 90, let me see, Slam came out in 98, we shot it in 97. It had to be probably 5 years before. I studied for 5 years, 92. It probably was 91, 92, I would say. Because just after that, the director thought that, she said, you might have something, you might want to look into this. And I said, thanks, but no thanks, I'm going back to school to get my degree. At any rate, a year later, it just kept sort of niggling in the back of my mind. And when something sticks like that with me, generally speaking, I take it as a sign that perhaps I should investigate. And so I took a class that summer at Lee Strasberg in New York, and had an experience, in the class that was very moving and really opened something up inside of me, and revealed to me that perhaps there was another place to put all of my experience and my expression, a place that would hold a bit more than maybe than poetry would. Oh, well, I mean, you'd have to ask David that, to be quite honest with you, but I would say simply that, we were running a wiretap the entire 5 seasons on someone. So The Wire, comes from that for sure. I don't know if there's some sort of, symbolic, metaphorical sort of meaning. I played Detective Kima Greggs. She she was known to be I guess everybody just knows me as the lesbian cop. But I see her as, more than that. I think in a certain way she was the moral compass of the police department. I think she held all of that. That was actually one of my favorite scenes. You get into the monologue just after that, where Kima talks about what moved her to become a cop and stay a cop, and the moment when her connection to the job was really sealed. Cheryl, the woman who was speaking most of that clip, played my. She was my girlfriend in the show, and she was an attorney and did not like the fact that Kima was in law enforcement, and really wanted me to get out of the that line of work. And so it was a moment where we really where you realize that Kima's really connected to her job, and her girlfriend realizes that she's very connected to the job and that it means more to her than she may realize. I'm sorry, wait a second. I just said that Cheryl was an attorney. No, she played. She worked at a television station. She wanted Kima to become an attorney. That's what it was. She wanted Kima to study law. There was certainly a population of people who could not watch the show. It was too raw and too real and painful for them to see, either because they came from that environment or because some folks use television as something to sort of unwind with, and so they didn't particularly care to spend their time in that world in that way. However, many folks felt as though a story that's not been told truthfully, clearly, and without apology was being told. And I'm talking about folks in law enforcement. I'm talking about judges and attorneys, politicians, as well as folks whose lives were depicted by some of the street characters. They felt as though someone was finally getting it right. I remember lying in bed on alert late one night as I heard an argument brewing in my parents' bedroom, only to be shocked by the deafening sound of my mother's jaw being crushed. I remember watching in horror as my mother's head lay on the chopping block of our kitchen counter, while my father held a large butcher's knife to her throat as she cried and begged to be put out of her misery. My mother used to tell a story of how I stopped an argument between her and my father when I was a toddler by telling my father to stop it. Don't make my mommy cry. I was 2 years old. That incident kicked off a pattern of my believing that I had some control over and some responsibility for the situation. Well, it's been many years and a long process of healing. So I would say at this point in my life, there is some distance from the the emotion and the sort of trauma of all that. So now it's a part of my story, but it's not me. So it was. I wouldn't say it was difficult for me to tell the story. I think really it's I think what was most difficult for me, if we can call it difficult or challenging for me, was just, my father's still living and we have a great relationship. Members of my family are still a part of my life. And so I was just concerned as to how it would reflect upon them and how they would take it. So just trying to navigate those waters of being respectful and honorable, and to honor their journey. Yeah. Well, I tell you, growing up, at times it was difficult. I grew up in an all black neighborhood, and just in general, I think with kids, you don't want to stick out or be different, but particularly, growing up, in the South. And newly desegregated South, newly desegregated. Busing had just started when I was in elementary school, and Virginia was sort of one of the last states on that track. So, there was a sort of a challenge there. I'm always having to, or many times, having to. Sort of, feeling as though I had to prove that I was, as black, whatever that means, as the rest of my, peers. And later on in life, I began to see that, my definition of perception of blackness at the time was quite skewed. It really was, if you were tough and you could kick butt, then you were respected, and that was sort of a part of the running definition of blackness at the time. So there was that sort of challenge. However, I believe that it has, being, growing up a mixed race person, I think has had its advantages. For me, in terms of how it shaped my worldview and my perception. I was always very aware that, I'm a person first, as opposed to, a label and an amalgamation of, what people can see in terms of my mother and my father, that I'm a female or what have you. And so there was always this strong impulse to unite and get folks to understand that I'm just a person, and that we are all people. My father was mentally ill. I later found out that he was paranoid schizophrenic. He was on lots of medication. My father is a brilliant man. He had moments of brilliance as a parent. My father, there were phases in our life where we tried to have Sunday dinner. Now, it might have been a tyrannical, nightmarish affair at times, but there were times when there was laughter at the table. My father thought he should teach us all how to play chess. By the time you were 6, you knew how to play chess. He had these moments of brilliance, but he had these, there came a time when he just turned into a monster, and I could no longer justify loving him. My mother died in 98. Wow. I started smoking pot when I was 11. And at the time, it wasn't as though I was doing it I wasn't conscious that I was doing it as an escape. It was an 11-year-old in the neighborhood with other 11 and 12-year-olds experimenting, with pot. But by the time I was 13, I was smoking every day. Again, at that time, you're not aware that you're doing it, to sort of, just keep things manageable or, create some distance between you and what's really bothering you inside. And I would also say that around that time was about the time that I pretty much gave up on fixing my family. I was just trying to bide my time. I spent a lot of my childhood, many childhood hours, trying to figure out how I could fix this situation. Around that, sometime between like 11 and 12 is when I just decided that there was nothing I could do about it, but I couldn't leave, and I had a whole plan to leave, and I was confident that I could leave, and I wanted to leave town. I didn't want to go to a foster family or anything like that. I wanted to go to New York and be on my own and start my own life. And it's kind of, strange, I'm sure, for people to hear that an 11-year-old is, making this plan. And I had, I was literally, about to walk out the door, had bag packed, everything. And I just kept seeing, just sort of like, in a way, visions, I guess, that of my mother just heartbroken and crying and feeling as though she had failed. Because I knew that my mother stayed in this marriage because she believed that we needed a father. And there was nothing I could do to convince her that, regardless, that perhaps this was not the arrangement. We could have a father, but maybe not living in this arrangement. But my mother grew up without a father, and I, realized that had a lot to do with, her, being adamant that we needed to keep our father, in the home. They met in Korea. Just after, I believe, it was just after the war when they met. Yeah. My mother was quite successful, considering where she came from. My mother had maybe, and even in Korea, I think my mother had maybe a 6th or 7th grade education. She could speak English, but reading and writing was a challenge for her. There was a point when we were, growing up, that she started taking classes at a local church. But my mother was very gifted, not simply just a seamstress, but she could just make anything from scratch. And she spent most of her life working for the government in a civil service capacity as an upholsterer down in Virginia, on the various bases down there, and she rose to the rank of a supervisor in a shop down in the Norfolk Naval Base. She always had a dream to build her own home. We grew up in a mixed income housing unit, and I saw my mother buy her first home when I was a senior in high school, and then within 10 years, my mother bought a piece of property out in Gloucester, Virginia, and had her brick house built, and on an acre and a half of land. She was quite successful. In junior high school, it was, speed and acid and marijuana. And then in later years of high school was when I first became introduced, when I was first introduced to cocaine. And that, that was pretty much. When it came to pot in particular, I enjoyed it. It was relaxing. It just, for me, it calmed my nerves. It got me out of my head. That's what the initial attraction to that was. Drinking was never something that I really took to. It was something that, eventually, when I got into cocaine, drinking was something that became a little bit of a balance for the edge that the coke would give in the years that I started to not like it, and I started to see where it was taking me. But I got out of it, initially, through, a therapist, through meeting a therapist. My first husband saw that there was a problem. We were having problems and saw there was a problem and suggested that we go to therapy. And this was the first time I'd ever tried therapy, and I went to therapy with him. And after our first session, she essentially said, "Listen, you guys need individual therapy before we even touch couples. Well, I'll see you separately." And when I came back to see her, she completely pulled my card, and no one had ever been able to pull my card. No one. I had written for 3 years in my journal that I was not living up to my potential. That no disrespect to housewives, but that I knew that I should be doing more than just kind of raising my kids, and I had a great life. We had a middle class lifestyle. I was a good mom, living in, this was in New York, Brooklyn at the time. I had become very adept at creating a beautiful picture. This is something I learned, when I was biding my time in junior high school, and I said, okay, I've got to be here. I can't leave my mom. This is a miserable situation. They're miserable. I can't save them from their misery, but I'm going to be happy. And I picked up drugs and started to create this sort of happy picture for myself, something that was tolerable for me to live in. That's when I became very active in sports, and for a while I did very well in school. I was in the Junior Honor Society. I was a cheerleader. I mean, I did all kinds of things, and there were a lot of cool, fun people who were doing those things, and we were, we created, a scenario in which there was some level of comfort, and we presented this picture to the world that allowed us to function and to earn money, have jobs and whatnot, and in a way this is sort of tied into, I think, sort of like the dual sort of existence that I think many African Americans live in this country. There is a face that you have to show when you're trying to get certain things accomplished, or X, Y, and Z. But then there is sort of the down home side, and the part of the culture that you can share with each other that you can't really share with the larger world, because there's some judgment attached to that. So this, I believe that this fed into the kind of picture that I was able to create, in my 20s, in my first marriage. When you live in a world that is never safe, where you feel abandoned and uncared for, numbing the pain and finding some kind of support becomes an essential survival skill. This is how I became, and how many children today become easy prey for pedophiles. This is why our young people create the nurturance they so desperately need by forming and joining gangs. This is why many children enter into the drug world at an early age. This is why the sex trade begins to seem like a viable option, and this is how we lose our nation's future. Without resources to deal with trauma, numbing your pain with drugs and sex, or creating an illusion of family by seeking support on the streets become your coping mechanisms. You will take what is given easily and freely. Oftentimes, these children end up in a pattern of using these self-destructive acts to escape the smallest of discomforts, never gaining the proper ability to handle simple stresses of everyday life. They end up having sex as a way to find emotional support, and may become very young parents. The effects of the violence they live with just add up in layers, burying them. Because I believe in the mission of the task force, that I believe that the fabric of our nation is is disintegrating and being ripped apart at the seams, because we're not paying enough attention to the trauma and the pain and the struggles that our young people are facing today. Oh, my children are older. I have a 21-year-old and a 25-year-old girls. My youngest daughter is graduating from California Institute for the Arts this year. My older daughter is, she's been working in retail for the last few years, and interested in fashion, and right now she has her sights set, in that direction. I live, I'm telling everyone, I live where I work, essentially. I spend quite a bit of time in Baltimore. When I'm working on Body of Proof, I'm in LA, and when that show is down, I come back to the East Coast, and I spend, part of my time in Baltimore, because ReWired for Change, the nonprofit that I run, is based in Baltimore. And I have a home in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, which used to be a vacation home. Now it's basically my primary residence. And then I have connections in New York, family and friends. My oldest daughter is in New York, so I pretty much kind of hop between those three places, but I'm using North Carolina as my primary residence right now. ReWired for Change. The seed, I guess the vision came to me in 2008, and then 2009 is when we officially started, and that's when we got our 501c3 in 2009. Well, ReWired for Change we, essentially, our mission is to support, empower, and affect the lives of high-risk youth and their families and the communities in which they live. We started by offering our pilot program, ReWired for Life, which is a program that was geared to high-risk young people who had been arrested before, and we used The Wire the Wire, the show, as a springboard for discussion and to awaken them to the possibilities of personal transformation. Initially, really the organization, it was my money that I used for the organization. That's still something that's ongoing right now. Right now for the last year and a half, we have been, it's been 2 years, 2010. For the last year and a half, we've been running a community home in Baltimore called the Village House. And at the Village House, we offer an after-school program, and we sponsor a local community group called the Village Council, and essentially open our doors to the community and to be supports for them in any way that we can. That house right now employs four people. Through the after-school program, we're talking about 7 to middle school. So I think what we have now is about 7 to 13. And then we were running our ReWire for Life program out of there, but right now our ReWire for Life program is down because we're revamping the curriculum and putting out the official ReWire for Life program later this year. So that's down. And then and then the community. One of the things that we discovered after offering the ReWire for Life pilot program. One of the things we discovered when through our work with the pilot program was that if our young people had to go back to families and communities that were broken and not unified and not healthy, then it would make their transformation much more challenging, and that there was no way to sort of isolate a population and truly help and truly assist them we're looking for real healing. We're not looking for, okay, you get your GED, you get a job, then you're set, you're off the streets. That means something to us. But what has unfolded is that what we want to see is a deep level of healing in the life of a young person, but also in the lives of the entire community. And so our overall mission really is to uplift and empower communities of folks to recreate community in a way that we have not seen in underserved communities since I was young. I think this boils down to something really simple, but that you say 70%. I actually was not familiar with that statistic. 70% of African Americans have children out of wedlock. Now, I'd like to know how that's broken down within age groups. I think that would inform, my answer. We all, the deepest need, I believe, of every human being is to be loved. I mean, that's a core need, that's something that, as an actor, you've got to know that, any character, somewhere in there, is a need to be loved. And when you don't get that nurturance and that, not to say that children who are involved in that kind of behavior aren't loved, but, to love in a healthy way entails a lot more than, being cared for in sort of basic ways. It calls for, an emotional, nurturance. It calls for, it calls for guidance. It calls for, a whole host of, other aspects that a young person needs to grow up healthily. And when you don't have those things, you reach out any way you can to feel that. And sometimes it's just touching, and and then one thing leads to another, and you become invested in you become invested, in another person in an unhealthy way. Things that by the time you're in your late teens or early 20s, things that a healthy young person, a person who's been nurtured properly, fully, and wholly, they're at the point now where they can self-nurture. I spent weeks trying to figure out how to get my hands on a gun, but I had no success. So I resorted to a new option after reading in a magazine how a popular R&B singer of the day had been scalded by a hot pot of grits. My last attempt to save myself and the family came one day when I was washing dishes. I washed myself calmly, take the biggest pot we had, fill it with water, put it on the stove to boil, and went back to doing the dishes. I now know that when I began to watch myself as though I were outside of my body, I had disassociated. Once the water boiled, I took the pot and I walked slowly into the living room, and I stood over my father as he slept on the sofa. All the scenes of violence I had witnessed flashed before my mind's eye. And then I saw us without him. I saw myself happy and free in my home. I saw laughter on the faces of the rest of my family. I stepped closer to the sofa. Just as I was about to throw the water on him, a horrifying thought suddenly jolted me to consciousness. The singer did not die. This pot of water was not going to kill my father. Suddenly, the pot seemed to shrink in my hands, and so did I. I began to see myself as this tiny child I was. A wave of grief and sadness rushed over me. I stood there growing smaller and smaller until I felt completely insignificant and totally useless. I've never spoken to my father about that. My father is a different man now. And I really want to make that clear, regardless of, the various, diagnoses and, problems he had, when we were younger. No, he did. I don't think he's seen that. But I have spoken to my father about the past, and I have tried to, gingerly kind of prepare him and speak to him about some of the things that are being revealed right now. But he has shared with me that he would rather not go back and revisit that time in his life, and that he's a changed man, and he'd like to sort of keep his focus on where he is now, and I need to respect that. I care about my father very deeply, and I want to make sure that folks understand that a life is very long, that redemption and transformation is possible. It happened in my life, it happened in the life of my father, and my family is not the family that I grew up in anymore. Oh, that had a grave impact on me. I think that was probably one of the, that was probably the most challenging, the sort of wreckage of that abuse was the most challenging for me to get through, because it took me decades to really understand that I was a victim, because I thought that there was a relationship. And it was a really, I was, this was probably from the ages of 4 to 9. And what was most difficult for me at the time was a sense of betrayal and abandonment, because when this babysitter left the neighborhood, she said she was coming back and she would visit me and see me. And what was most devastating to me was that she never came back. And so that, as you can imagine, informed, my intimate relationships, moving forward, and and a lot of, is, played into, a lot of my own sort of relationship dysfunction, and that was followed by, in years later as a teenager, I was also, I was raped as a teenager, and that was, all of that sort of tangled up. And I did the best I could dealing with the circumstances. Within those circumstances, I did the best that I could at the time. So I wouldn't say there was something I would do differently. there were things that had shaped my mind to make the kind of decisions that I was making. I was, incredibly bright. But because I didn't, somewhere inside, despite all the sort of accomplishments and the picture that I created in high school, active in sports and, basically had a B average, I wasn't studying. I could I could have a B average without studying and getting high every day and working. In all those activities, I had decided not to, I was a straight A student pretty much in elementary school, but I decided that, what was all that work for? If I couldn't be happy. I believe if I'd had a mentor in high school, I think I looked like the kid that was going to be fine. So no one thought that I needed, a mentor of any sort. She's going to be fine. If I had a mentor who could see beneath the surface, that, I would have gone on to, I absolutely would have, finished college. I probably would have gone to, an Ivy League type school, and, because there was this sort of idea that Sonja would be a lawyer or something down the line. But I threw that away when I gave up on, when happiness really was what I was striving for. But getting back to what I would say to young people in these situations, I'll tell you what really led me, got me to the light, brought me to where I am today. Because if it can happen for me, it can happen for every single young person who is struggling with the issues that I was struggling with, and even worse. I have friends who have stories like mine, who are successful now, personally and professionally. And the thing that I think we all have in common is that unbeknownst to ourselves, we listened and nurtured we nurtured the ability to listen to our inner voice. There is an inner voice and an intuition, if you want to call it that, that I strongly believe is connected to something much greater than myself and other people. And it is knowing when to move, when to fall back, when to jump off a cliff even though it looks as though you're not going to make it. Because that voice will never fail you. Getting to know that inner voice and following it in every instance that you can. This is the thing that I see, that folks who come from that background, who find success, have, it's a muscle that they have trained and nurtured, and that is very strong within them. And that's something that, that's what, we'd like to teach and like to, in the ReWired for Life program. My oldest daughter probably had the most challenges because when she was born, I was still using. I did my sort of my 180 in my life when she was about 4 or 5 years old. And then, those early years, after you've done the 180, everything doesn't just clear up. I mean, then you're putting in all that hard work, and while you're processing and going through, and all this stuff is being drummed up, and you've got to raise kids, and be, in a marriage, and you've created a bit of a mess there, and, it's a messy process. And so, the people around you get splattered with some of that, and it's, which is, unfortunate, but it's a part of the process. And I did it for myself, but I was inspired. I really moved to do it, for my children, because I saw what I was creating in the home. I saw that I was becoming the type of entity that my father had become in our home, and that it was affecting my older daughter. So my older daughter has had to, work through, I think, quite a few more challenges than my younger daughter. My younger daughter was born just before I turned around. So she has seen, the best of me. I had a really supportive husband at the time. we could afford therapy, and I was in therapy, and for some years I did get the help of an outside support group, and to be quite honest with you, within that support group, all I saw around me was successful lives, a great number of people successfully turning their lives around. So those numbers, I can't, I certainly, I can't refute or validate. Again, this is what I believe is tearing, this country apart. What we refuse to see, what we think is none of our business because it's uncomfortable to deal with until someone in our family is affected. If we don't collectively address some of the shadows and the dark, what's it's no longer hiding in the dark corners or the recesses of society. It's out in broad daylight now. Because it's who I am. It's my life's mission. All my life I've known I was born for some purpose. This is what's coming through. And I'm simply trying to honor that. I'm simply just trying to honor what's true for me. Oh my gosh, a lot of these young people are robbing and stealing so they can have food. Oddly enough, my brother was down there trying to make a change. He had moved from Virginia to North Carolina. My father was down there, and he was really trying to make a change. And he was living in my uncle's home, and next door was a young woman who had an abusive boyfriend. And from time to time, he would talk to her. And the boyfriend basically was jealous and told him to stay away from his girlfriend. And my brother wasn't going after the woman. He was just befriending her and speaking with her. And eventually he killed him because of that. When we were running the pilot program, I was a part of the facilitation team because it was important for me to see what was working and what wasn't working. But also because I have such a passion for young people, and particularly young people who are caught up in those cycles, and such a desire to see them transform and overcome. It's that work I love. I love doing that work so much. However, I just don't have the capacity, in terms of time, resources, and just, there. And I've, in this line of work, I've seen a lot of folks who've been very well trained to do that kind of work, and it's been better for me to sort of empower them to do that work. It's very, preaching to these kids and talking at them is not the way that they're going to make that shift. The shift is experiential. It's something that has to happen internally. And so, the gift of being able, the gift of those who know how to guide those young people, through that transformation is, this gift of knowing, when to fall back and allow them to express themselves and sort of make the mistakes that they need to make without condemning them and without abandoning them, and always knowing that you're there to support them regardless, because it's unconditional love that these young people need to connect to on a very deep level. That I'm not bad, there's nothing wrong with me, that no matter what I do, that I'm still worthy. That's one piece. And then there's finding the curriculum that will I think a really good curriculum allows these young people to explore themselves, to get to know themselves and explore a lot of issues, and raises awareness about things that they may not know about, but at the same time understand that what they have inside, their thoughts, their feelings, their opinions, their experiences are very valid and very valuable.